So this is a bonus boss story today. For a while, my garden was homeless. Okay, and you might say, boss, how do you have a homeless garden? Well, I had a really awkward living situation when I moved back to California. It was a charity house. I mean, I had to pay the deposit and the rent and everything, but the reason I got the apartment was due to knowing someone who knew someone, right? Who lived on the property. I did not meet the actual landlord. I only met his wife. And if I'd met him, I probably would have had, I probably still would have moved in because it was my only choice. I had a job, I had to be here. But I soon found out that he was an OCD, rageaholic, alcoholic control freak who lived on the property. And it was very toxic. It was a really bad living environment. And I'm not the only one that's had bad experiences with them, so I know it's not me, right? All the neighbors were like, we're so sorry you live there. And I'm like, what? They're like, you're really nice. We're so sorry. I'm like, that's not a good sign. Anyway, so when I moved in, I said, is it okay if I have a couple pots with plants? And he's like, oh yeah, it's fine, it's fine. And my next door neighbor was talking to the guy's wife, and he's like, can we have can we have a shared in the ground plot? And he's like, oh yeah, that's fine, that's fine, it's fine. For the first year. And you could tell, like, he literally would walk by and he'd be like, you know, and he'd always be nitpicking at things, just always nitpicking, and he'd always be having these conversations with us about the garden. He'd be like, well, boss, I gotta talk to you about your pots. They're kind of sitting there, and if we have an earthquake, they could fall over. Well, we had like a 7.5 earthquake. This is a long story for the homeless garden, and kids. This is the seed of the story. Kids in the garden, okay? So he'd be like, I gotta, and I'd be like, okay, what would you like me to do? His name was Ray. Okay, Ray, like, just tell me what you'd like. Like, would you like me to take the pots away? Like, would you like me to remove? Oh no, it's fine, but just put them on the ground because, or like, he wouldn't even get to that point. Like, I'd have to, like, pulling teeth. I'd have to ask him like a million questions to try and figure out what he wanted. So finally, it got to the point that my neighbor across the road apparently. And I say road, I mean like walkway. So my neighbor across the way actually was diagnosed. I'm not quite sure exactly what she had, schizophrenia or something, like a really serious mental illness. She was medicated, heavily medicated for it. I did not know. My friend, I put that in quotes. So my mom's friend who got me the place, who was the wife of the landlord, knew. And set us up as friends, knew. So the lady across the way went batshit crazy. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I just mean she had enough. She'd lived there for like 7, 8, 10 years, 15 years, however long she'd lived there. She'd put up with this guy for a long time. Their house, like, he wouldn't fix things. They had literally a leak that went through and rotted out the boards on their front door. I mean, it was really bad. It was a really bad living situation. So she lost her ever-loving marbles. She, like, yelled at him. She got in her car and she left. She left her husband, her kid, or adult son, her cats, her garden. She left. Gone. Never to be heard from ever again. And so he, of course, was like, yay, she's gone. And so he started to throw away my garden stuff as well as hers. And I was like, and he basically gave me an ultimatum. He was like, you need to remove all of the dirt. We had brought in like 5 yards of good soil. So he told me I had to remove all the dirt that I'd brought in. Because I was still the person living there, I had to basically clean up her mess. So I had to hand dig out 5 yards of dirt and transport it out of there. I had to move these giant freaking pots, which I ended up keeping, so I guess I kind of got the good deal of it. So I had to move all of the stuff out of there, and there was probably 24 pots, and then now I had all these containers of, plastic containers of dirt that I had to use to get it out of there, and I had to store it somewhere. So at the time, I worked at landscaping construction company. And so I asked my boss, I was like, hey, can I store this at the yard temporarily? And he's like, oh yeah, that's totally fine. So I literally moved my garden to the yard. My snap peas, all the stuff I'd planted, right? And this was probably spring, summer, early summer, like spring-ish, right? So I'd planted all this stuff, she'd planted all this stuff. So I have all this stuff at the yard, and my freaking coworkers are like eating my food. I'm like, it was so embarrassing. Like it was a very strange situation, because literally my garden suddenly was in public domain, like the things I'd planted. So they're like nibbling on like the snap peas and stuff, but they were kind of impressed. I think it did get me a little bit of street cred with some of my coworkers. They're like, oh shit, she knows what she's doing. So anyway, then, are you guys ready for this? I don't think you were ready for how dramatic a homeless garden could be. So anyway, my garden gets moved to my workplace, all right? Are you guys ready? This was a very dramatic period of my life. There was a lot of stuff going on. It made for a lot of good stories. A lot of good stories come from this era. It was not fun to live through, but it was quite a good story creating era. So, we had this property that my boss owned and had owned for years upon years, decades upon decades, however long, a long time. So in the US, we have cities and counties, right? And then states. So the city line was literally at the fence. So we were one property in. So if the county line had been on the other side, we would have been in the county, but we were in the city. And he should not have been running a business like he was. That was a commercial, landscaping, whatever, zoning thing that he was doing on that property. Okay? And we'd gotten away with it for however many years that the boss had the business there. But he kept pissing off the neighbor, right? If you're gonna do illegal shit, make sure you're friends with your neighbors. It's boss tip of the night. And I mean, it wasn't like illegal, but it was, because he wasn't supposed to be having that business there. So finally, the neighbor got fed up with getting woken up at like 6 a.m. to weed eaters being turned on, 5 or 6 trucks going on. And the thing that broke the neighbor, and I'm still bitter about this, so the boss's wife was basically making money off of all of us. So all of the money that the company earned went to her. I was getting paid the equivalent of $11 an hour, which was probably lower than minimum wage. Bending over backwards working there. All the guys worked ridiculously long hours, got paid nothing, had no benefits, no health benefits, no retirement, nothing, right? At the time. They've since kind of updated it. The last Christmas I was there, she got a brand new Mercedes. Huge house on the hill. You know, like, all the money was going to his wife. He was not benefiting from it. All the money the company was earning was going to his wife. So his wife decided she always wanted to own a winery. Okay? You guys ready for this? So, her husband planted the grapes. Our guys harvested, tended, kept up the vineyards, did everything. Helped produce, stamped down, did the whole thing with the wine production. And she would show up for the photo ops. She'd be there like, oh, look, we're harvesting grapes. And she made a big deal about it being, a very family-oriented business. And she grew up with her dad in the fields, and that's why she wanted a winery. But she never got her hands dirty. She never gave back. She never talked to any of us. So this particular spring day, the bottling line, so there's these mobile bottling lines that'll show up that'll bottle your wine if you're a smaller winery and you don't have the equipment, showed up at 5 a.m. and turned on the generator. And this is in a residential neighborhood. And the neighbor who had been complaining forever and ever and ever was like, I'm done. I'm done, right? This is the theme. I'm done. So he called the county. He got people out there, or the city, because we were in city limits. Yeah, that's it. So he called the city, got them out there. They came out, and they gave my boss basically, like, I think 30 days notice, 30 or 60 day notice to move out. They're like, you have to move, this is illegal. We are going to fine you or whatever. I think they did fine him, but they're like, you have to move off this property. you can't be doing this. This is, you know, we've warned you before. You're still doing it. Your neighbor reported it. So suddenly, the company I work for is homeless. So we move everything to my boss's house, including my garden. Okay? So my garden is homeless twice, all right? So I had to move it off of the place where I lived. Then I moved it to the yard. Then we got kicked out. So suddenly my garden is at my boss's house. And by house, I mean gigantic mansion. Where all the money that the company made went. And there was like a mother-in-law unit where his mother-in-law, his wife's mom, lived. And his mother-in-law took care of his kids. And he had 2 older kids, like kind of young preteen teens at the time. And then like a surprise 3rd. And she was fantastic. Very strong-willed, brilliant little kid. And every now and then I'd be down there gardening, you know, tending to my stuff. And she would come up and she'd be like, "What are you doing?" You know, and I was like, "Oh, I'm doing this." And so, full circle, back to the seed of the story. One day I was out there and I pulled up a carrot while she was there. And I pulled up a carrot. And I showed her, and she's like, "Oh, it's a carrot!" And she's like, "Can I eat it?" And I was like, "Yeah, but you have to go wash it off." And so she goes to like we wash it off, and she tries it, and her face, like, it was the most magical thing for her to like pull the carrot out, realize she could eat it, and eat it, right? You know, wash it off and eat it. Her grandmother was pissed. Like, and her grandmother never talked to me, by the way. Her grandmother never talked to me. She would always, like, evil eye me. Like, I'm keeping an eye on you, you know? And she'd be watching me. And it was not a great place to have my garden. But she got pissed. She's like, you know, you shouldn't have, you know. Like, it's a carrot out of the ground. It's the most, like, the healthiest thing ever, right? So it was a homeless garden residing inside a homeless landscaping business. And this is like where things went downhill at that company, and where I was like, this is no longer a healthy place for me to be working. So where I lived wasn't healthy, where I worked wasn't healthy. And then I finally found this place, and I got my own business, and it's been amazing ever since. And I'm very lucky. Oh no! You know what? I'm gonna use that as my tagline, Melter Snowflakes. My stories are so entertaining that you will miss a live cop chase in LA. I feel like it should be like, you know, I should do that YouTube thing where you pop up the comments, you know, on the screen. 10 out of 10 would miss a car chase for this stream.